Sheriff of Strongest Farm. Today we're going to talk farm gates. What are the best farm gates for the farm? I'm going to show you multiple different types of farm gates, just not the standard ones that you're used to. I'm going to talk a little bit about hardware and installation, show you some latches that we use and some wheels for gates, and point out a little bit of that kind of stuff. But it's mainly going to stretch your mind about what types of gates we should use where. That's all coming up today. Welcome back. Behind me, as we start talking about gates here on the farm, you're going to see your standard pole gate. So these are 6 or 7, sometimes they're 5. They come in all kinds of different lengths, right? Anywhere from 3 foot, 6 foot, 10, 12, 16. Most of the gates here on our farm are 16-foot gates. And that's what I would recommend you buy if you plan on going in and out of them with any kind of equipment. But these are steel gates. Typically, I have seen some galvanized ones made. I see a lot of homemade gates, but these pipe gates or pole gates you can buy at any farm fleet store out there. These gates are your 2-hinge system. Okay, so you're going to have 2 hinge bolts. Typically, the top bolt has this adjustable nut where you can slide it up and down. There are multiple different styles of hinge bolts. I will tell you, I recommend the bolts that go all the way through a post, which I believe I have one here. So you can see it went all the way through. And then because this is where animals are in this feedlot, I chose to cut this off with a grinder. The reason I choose this over your typical corkscrew type of hinge is because it's easier for you to adjust. You can adjust the nuts in and out for the canter of the gate. This gate was hinged at a 90 degree, meaning the bolt came this way, but my gate goes this way. I like that if you're looking to get a large swing. So I can swing this gate more than 180 degrees really, but 180 degree swing, you go on that 90. The better way to do a gate is to put it straight out. The bolt's parallel with the gate, and they'll swing 180 degrees that way as well. But for this system where I needed it on this line, because I wanted it to fold all the way back against this fence, I chose to come out 90. So you can do it either way, but adjusting them and getting a better gate is much better if you go parallel with your gate. So that's one little tip there. This is your standard pole gate. Most of our gates are locked down with chains. So they have this little notch system in your gate. You wrap that chain around, and that's how most people lock them. I'm going to stop here because this is the hinge system or the latch system that we like to use on the farm. I probably have 20 of these around the farm. It just makes going in and out much quicker. I will put a link to the Amazon link that I buy these from. You can get these at Rural King and TSC and all the other farm stores. I'm sure they'll cover the same thing. There are some better brands than others, so just look at the quality of them. The brand that I like has a really solid pin right here that slides up into this track. And there's pros and cons to this. Some key points is to make sure I set this on the gate first. So when I'm installing it, I install the gate side first, and I make sure that one bolt is above and one bolt is below the pipe that you're attaching it. That keeps the cattle from being able to raise or lower that. If you put it in a section where it doesn't surround a pipe, it can slide up and down. So I'll get that set, then I'll get my horizontal plane of my gate adjusted with my hinge side, and then I'll come back and I will attach these. One negative to these latches is that you have to have them pretty close. So from your post to your gate needs to be about 3 inches in order for that solid peg to slide into that latch enough, but not be so tight that you can't jam it in. You really don't want to cut that peg any shorter, and you don't want to have it too far away. We've seen guys that have installed these, and like you can see here, I have another 2x6 screwed on. I put a treated 2x6 here because this gap was so big it wasn't catching enough to suit me. Now, if your bolts were perpendicular to your gate, unlike mine are on this particular setup, I could adjust that hinge out a little farther and gain a little bit of that. It makes it a little bit easier to add these, but you also can, put a board in there like I did. But these are the latches I like. Standard pole gate. We're going to get into a lot of different types here. Let's get. Before we go away from pole gates, I did want to show you my alley system here. It's kind of overgrown right now. We haven't weed eated here in the fall, but you're gonna get the idea. There are actually 4 gates. This alley is 12 foot wide and it's about 100 foot long, maybe 80 foot long, but there are 4 gates, separating gates. The last one being a swoop gate that pushes them into our loading chute and into our head chute. And so I brought you here for one particular reason, is to talk about where these pole gates are best used. And so there are 2 main places on the farm that I require a good gate, not some of the other gates that we're going to show you later. A solid, hard gate, one that is in a loading area or a sorting area like this, where cows are going to be rougher. You might get them into tighter quarters. You're using the gate to sort an animal, and so that's definitely needed in a sorting. The other thing is on perimeter fence. I don't use any kind of temporary gates on my perimeter fence or where I enter my main pasture. So anything where if the gate was left open or you used a different type of gate that a cow could jump it is a bad choice. So I'm going to use a hard gate in those situations. There are a few different types of pole gates, and I'm going to show you a few more before I get into the kind of special gates that we have here on the farm. The next type of pole gate that we have here behind us is what they call a corral gate. So the biggest difference between a standard pole gate and a corral gate is the height. And so they're much taller, about 16 inches, and some, depending on what type of gate you buy, some are only about 12 inches taller. But there's a few main things with these. One is they have this foot down below that keeps them up off the ground, and 2, the locking mechanism. There's just no hinges on these. So they're meant to go together with these pins, right? So I use these as fence gates. I have in the past for fence line gates. They're nice for sorting systems. They're taller, they're easier to climb over. Some negatives with these: you should not use these with sheep or goats that are horned because they'll get their heads in them. They're not good for pigs because pigs will go right underneath of them. And the other negative is that they rust quicker because they're on the ground. They sit on the ground, and so they tend to rust quicker. The other thing is you have to make a special hinge system if you want to attach these to the poles, which I'll show you in a second. But there's a lot of other pros about these. These are typically used for round pin rings. You'll see a lot of horse people use these style of gates. But if you have spots that you need to put gates and these link together, you could use these gates to make a run. You can move these around your farm. So they're very versatile. A lot of people really like corral gates for their versatility. Let's go look at what you have to build though if you want to attach these to a pole. So I've never seen these before. I come up with this idea and I've never been able to buy them. So you're going to have to make these. If you can find a place to buy these would be great. But I made these, welded them here in our shop. And so I'm going to show you what I did. Basically, this is, I believe this is probably 16 gauge steel. It's about an 1/8 inch thick, a little bit bigger than an 1/8 inch maybe, whether it's millimeter stock or whatever. But I took a piece of flat plate, and then I took the same flat plate and I cut it into 1-inch strips, 6 to 8 inches long, bent it into a V. So if you can get a good look here, I bent it into a V, and then I welded it to this flat plate, drilled 2 holes in it. You could drill 3 and put another one in the center, but I just ran lag bolts right into my gate. So what I did is to figure out this spacing as I kind of came over to my gate when I had this idea, and then I tacked them in place, made marks before I went back in my shop. And then I'm able to take these things and put them in sections and then start my run of corral gates with these special adapters. These are also the same adapters that I made and I use for my head gates. So I have a feeding gate section here, right in this area here, and I'll show you the head gate as we walk over here. But I have to have those same brackets, and so I put those brackets on the posts. That way I can take my head gates down in the summer and spring when I'm not using them, and they pretty much just stay here. It allows me to clean that section out. My head gates are never locked down. They come off really easy if I want to clean, even in the winter. And then just put those head gates back in and put the pins in them. So head gates would be another type of gate. This is still a style of a pole gate, but this is made so our cattle will go up and stick their head in. You can buy these. I've seen guys make them. There's all different types, but if you're gonna build you a hay chute like we did out of head gates, I'd recommend buying the gates before you set your post. And so we actually bought the gates, and then we had a good measurement for our posts, and I could build those adapters and hook those up. Third type of pole gate we have on our farm is what I would call a goat or sheep gate. And so there's much less poles, as you can see, and then it has this wire mesh. Some people call it pig wire, but this is a 2x4 slotted system. I'm not particularly fond of these gates. These gates are much thinner. They're meant for sheep and goats, and you can see the cows leaned up against it one day and were rubbing and actually bent this gate. It's here, I use it. It is effective for cattle, but you definitely don't want to use these sheep or goat gates in a sorting system. So on a gate where they won't typically rub, and actually I think they pushed a round bale into it is what got it to bend. They were rolling a round bale with their nose, and it had some trajectory, and it bent that gate a little bit. Still works, still holds in cows. I got it because it was here at the farm when I bought the farm. It was laying in the weeds and I used it. It's effective. But if you have sheep or goats, that is the way to keep their horns out of pole gates like this, is to buy something like that. You do have another option though. Every gate on a farm is an investment. I mean, these things are 200 bucks if you buy them brand new, upwards to 350, depending on the size, the diameter of the tube can make them more, how heavy they are. But if you find some gates at an auction, and usually what I do on an auction is I take 50% of what the gate costs new. So let's just say 200 for my easy math. So if I could get a gate for 100 bucks minus 30, and I'll tell you why in a second. So if I could buy a gate at an auction for $70, even if it's rusted like this one, so it's a good solid gate still, the bottom pipes aren't rusted out, I'll buy a gate for about that price at an auction, and here's what I'll do to it. Now for my example, you're gonna have to think outside the box a little bit. But what I did here is I bought some of this pig wire. And so that's why I took $30 off of it. So usually at auctions, I try to get stuff for 50% of the price. A 16-foot section at our local farm store of this pig wire is 30 bucks. So if I can buy a gate for $70, I can then buy a 16-foot section of that pig wire. I'll take that gate to my shop, I'll wire brush it down, I will weld on to a rickety older gate, as long as it's straight, some pig wire like this, and I can make it into a pig gate or a stronger cattle gate. And then once I weld that wire onto it, I'll go through and paint it, and it'll last a good 20 years after that, as long as I take care of it. Now, if I put pigs against it all the time, they're gonna tear it up quicker, but cattle for the most part will do that. This is another way you could turn an old pole gate into a gate that is good for sheep and goats, where they won't get their head stuck into it. And so everybody, I'm not a big sheep or goat guy, I don't have them, I'm just trying to give you good information, but everybody that has sheep or goats is worried about these pole gates for smaller animals getting their head stuck in. I will tell you, for pigs, which we have here as well, pigs do not have a problem with that. They're not dumb enough to get their head in there and then not be able to get it back out. Pigs that are a good size, so 150 or more pounds, these pole gates are fine. The corral gates, they'll go under, but the regular pole gates will hold in those pigs. We had a pig farm growing up, and those gates were everywhere, and they are fine. But if piglets will go through them. So wherever you're gonna keep your piglets at, you're gonna wanna weld that wire on there, or buy a goat or sheep gate to hold in those piglets so that they don't run through the hole. Another thing I like to do with my pole gates to keep them from sagging over time, and I made a video specifically about sagging gates, but is I will use those corkscrew hinges on the chain side. So we have the hinge side down at that end, and then I have the chain side at this end of the gate, and I will use it at the bottom down here. So what we do is we lift up on the gate off of that hinge piece that's right here, if you can see that. What that does is it keeps my gate up and level, and it keeps the pressure from that post over there on that side where the hinges are at from working that post back and forth over time with swinging this gate. So as it's locked, I bring it over. I typically set mine to where I have to raise it up about a ½ inch, get it up on that peg, and then I chain my gate, and the pressure is off of that post now. The gate is actually holding better pressure between them. So there's a tip for you if you want to use those corkscrew style hinges. The next style of gate is probably my favorite style of gate on the farm, especially for price. I also like it because you can span a very far distance. So this gate opening here is 24 feet, and these are spring gates. So my fence is off right now, hopefully. Yeah. So the spring gates are electrified, okay? So if you have electric fence on your farm, spring gates are really good. If you don't have electric fence, this gate isn't gonna help you much because eventually they're gonna test it and know that they can go right through it and walk through it. So here I have two, and this is my typical setup. I have one about 42 inches, and then the other one is about 24 inches off the ground there. And I've learned some different things about these over time, these spring gates. And so the first one is a good handle, and you can see I've broke one there, I've got to replace it. But you buy a good handle, and you buy a handle that is not full plastic. You want an inserted steel plastic handle. So in here is metal, and then over here is metal so that it connects to the electric fence. And there's two types of these. There's a solid type, which is what this green one is, and then there's one that the metal is on a spring. On a spring gate, I don't like the spring handles. I'll show you where those are useful later. I like the more solid handle because those spring handled ones wear out quicker and they stretch over time. The other thing I've learned is that I use these black plastic tees. Let's see if you can see one here. And I put a metal insert into them, a galvanized or a metal insert, and that's where I hook my electric power wire. So when I open this, if you want these things to not be charged when they're open, you would only hook power in on the hook side. And so I have them powered at both sides so that when I open this gate, power doesn't flow through necessarily the gate in this section, but I want them hitting power from both sides. So there's two sides of my farm. It's basically just the way I've set my electric fence up. This is one run of wire all the way from the front. This part of the farm back here is a second. So now my spring gate becomes my jumper of power. It worked effectively. I was getting good power, but I also ran one underline because I wanted to be able to open this gates at times and not have one single strand. So basically I've got on that side of the farm, the power goes in, and on this side of the farm, it also goes in, and then the power will hit each other at the back. It just made my amperage at the very back of the farm a little hotter. But that's how I would do it. Hook those metal things in. I got my underground cable, and then I strip it, and then I hook it right in with some screws there that I also buy at Rural King. These are just fence wire clamps, but they're more of a bolt, not just a crimp. And I'll put those on there. And so I love these spring gates. These are not perimeter fence gates. So I've said that already, but I only used pole gates for my perimeter fence, but spring gates are really nice. The next style of gate is a poly rope gate. And so it's very similar to your spring gates, but this gate is even cheaper. This is where I will use the handles with the springs. So you can see it here. It gives you some ability. This to move it back and forth as you lock it in. This rope does not bungee out, okay? So this is, I believe, 3/8 poly braid rope. And I don't know at which point they go from wire to rope, but this is a thicker rope, but it has the electrical wires in it, just like my single strand fence with the cows out here, the poly braid wire that I use. And so same kind of concept, same height. I use the same attachments up here, these black screw-in posts. I make a loop, and then I put that peg down through it, and then I leave tails. So when I'm making this loop, I'm gonna leave like a 2-foot tail, and I tie these tails together. So as these two fences are connected, same thing, my underground wire comes from my fence, and I found these clamps, these bigger clamps at a Rural King, and I could clamp down on that, and it made this fence hot. Now this is hot all the time. As long as my fence is hot, these ropes are hot. And so over on that side, they hook right into the plastic. There's no metal hook. I had made these prior to that idea. I think if I ever made these again, I would put metal and hot wires on both sides. Pros and cons there. You don't have to run an underground wire if you have this. But the negative is if your fence doesn't feed this line without this being shut, it's a bad idea. So you should run underground and double hit it at that point. But this is an extremely cheap way to make a gate. This poly braid rope, I had a 200-foot roll that was just left. Somebody gave it to me, and I made these on a whim. The negative with these is when you unhook them, if you want cows to go in and out of here for a day, so at times this will be a paddock, and then we will let cows, I'll rope this area off, and they can come back into the woods for shade in the summer, which we're working on this area now and excavating and stuff, trying to get more silvopastures. But this rope stays open. So what I'll typically do is take one of my poly stakes and I'll stake it right there, and I'll wrap these things in a circle and hang them on them. If you just hook them back to the fence and leave it lay on the ground, it doesn't ground out my fence, but it is a little bit. It sits there and it ticks. You understand? Now these gates, okay, these work very efficient for me. I've never had a cow or a calf go through any of these gates, but it's obvious if something wanted through there, they're going to get through there. Once again, not a perimeter gate. The other thing about this and training cows to these gates is that they're on single strand poly wire. They're trained to the white electrical poly braid. So they're going to respect this the same as they do that. And in that sense, you could make a gate if it's internal out of your single strand. You maybe would have just 2 poly stakes and run 3 strands across at your gate where you would open that up and tie them. There's lots of different ways to do it, but these stay here permanently. When I got to this farm, this fence was up. He did it on a grant, but there were all kinds of gates that had nothing there. The fence was here, but he just let cows roam and open graze. So there was no moving of cows. So I put all these in. Instead of spending thousands of dollars on fence, I had this. I used it temporary thinking, okay, it's going to last 6 months, Jared, and you're going to have to buy gates. It's been here 2.5 years now, and I've never had to buy a gate. I've got the same handles, the same connections. I built this in maybe 30 minutes, and I've got gates that are like this everywhere. These rope gates, I like these rope gates as well. The spring gates were here, so I left the spring gates up, and I really like them as well. There is one section up here on my farm where I had an opening, and it was only a 6-foot opening, and I used poly braid wire, the same wire that I use for my cows. And it's a 2-strand just like this. I don't like it. I won't make gates out of that same Super 9 poly braid that I get from PowerFlex Fence. I like the view of the rope better because they see it better, and I see it better on the gator. And that is why I don't like the poly braid, because it's a hard, fast fence and you'll tear stuff up if you run through there. If you're going too fast and aren't paying attention. I've almost ran through that poly braid wire going too fast and forgetting that that gate was closed. And so there's one up there. I'm going to be replacing it with this, but I ran out of this braided rope. And so I went to the poly braid because I was in a hurry and I needed to get gates shut up so we could rotationally graze. So my recommendation, I would not put any permanent, if you're training to electric fence, if they're trained to your electric fence, I would not put any expensive permanent pole gates on the inside of your farm whatsoever. I won't do it. If I'm building a new farm, I wouldn't use that at all, other than areas where I'm going to be sorting and others in areas that are on the permanent outside perimeter fence. Gates that are a far distance. So if I had an opening that was anywhere from 15 to 30 feet wide, I'm going to use a spring gate. That's my recommendation. I like the spring gates, and I'm going to use 2. Can you keep them in with 1? Yes, but only full-size cows. That is another advantage to having these 2 gate systems like this, these 2 rope systems or spring systems. Let's say I want to sort cows off from calves. I can get them used to going from this paddock into the woods, right? I put my mineral in here. I can shut just the top. All the calves will come under, but the cows will stay in there. And so then I can sort my calves off, shut this rope gate, move the calves or the cows away, and my calves are already sorted, and I just put them into a new paddock. Like I say, cows and calves, depending on the height, you can keep them in with 1 spring gate. I like the 2 gate system. Another thing is gates where internally lots of animals are going to go through at once. I prefer a spring gate because then you can have a wider gate. They don't have to jam through an 8 or 12 or 16 foot section. So I prefer the spring gates. But on small sections like this, the rope gates are so cheap, you might have 20, maybe 30 bucks in that because of those fancy electrical handles and the metal piece and those little pieces. But it's less than 30 for sure. And it doesn't take long to build. So as long as you're building fence, these rope gates, they're the way to go for, I think this is a 16 foot section here. Any further than that, I would probably go to a spring gate, which is a little bit more, but definitely not even a third or a quarter of the cost of a pole gate. So one last point here about perimeter fence. And so this is not my property on that side where the corn is. It is a farm that I would like to buy someday. So if I was building fence here, brand new fence on a farm, and you know, hey, there's pasture over there that I could maybe rent, but I'm not renting now, or there's a farm over there that one day I would like to buy, I would go ahead and put a gate in. And I want you to think about the cost of that. One, if there's people that live over there and they're renting the land now, this is a good way to be neighborly, right? We're saying we don't want to shut you off. There's a gate here. Drive your gator through. Come see us on our farm. You know, perhaps. The other thing about this gate is it gives you the option the second they want to rent it to you, or the second you need to go and help them, you can open this gate. I have had built gates like this before, and the neighbor said, why'd you put a gate there? You're never going to be renting my farm. The excuse I use, and that's not happened on this farm, to be clear, so my neighbors don't get upset with me. The excuse I use for putting a gate in is it's also another way to go on that side of the fence to bush hog, to keep my fence clean. And so maybe you do it just to be neighborly for that. You put a gate in to be neighborly and go on that side of the fence and bush hog, and it's a good, easy way. But the cost of this is going to be a $200 or $300 gate. It's going to be extra time on your H braces. So you got another at least 50 bucks for each H brace. Time when you're putting fence in, you got to have underground cable here for your electric fence. So there's some investment there, around 400 bucks all together with time and everything. But ultimately 400 bucks in the life of your farm, it's a good opportunity for you to put a gate. If you don't know those people yet, or you don't need to go over there, this is one where I would put the lag bolt underneath the gate to hold my fence post up, and I would probably also lock my chain so that no hunter decides to open that gate that's mad at you and let your cows out. If I was gonna build this fence, and so you can see way down through there, fence goes way there. Why is this gate in the middle? If it were me, this would be my 300-foot section. So I'm gonna run, this is woven wire on the outside with a bumper wire on the end. I'm gonna count up 300 feet with my posts, because that's about where the end of my woven wire is gonna go, maybe 315. Those rolls come in 300 or 330 feet. You're gonna leave about 6 feet on each end for tying and those kind of things. But I'm gonna figure out where the end of that roll is gonna be, and that's where I'm just gonna build my H brace, because it's a natural place to stop building fence. Then I'm gonna put a gate there. Then I'm gonna start a new piece of new roll of fence and go that way. It's also a good way to break up the tightness. So if this fence is damaged, I can tighten a smaller section because there's a gate there. You know, splice it in. So there's pros and cons to that, but it is a cost, I understand. But I did want to show you, this is a perimeter gate that I never use because I don't farm that. Just hope someday I'm gonna buy it. There's one type of gate that I don't have on this farm, and I don't personally trust, that people use, and you could adapt in the same way that I do, that with these spring gates or rope gates. And that's a bungee cord gate. I've seen these bungee cords, they stretch out, and you can hook them on the same way as your spring gate, and I've heard people that like them. I haven't figured out how they stay charged, because wires don't stretch like that. You have to have the wire filaments for those bungee cords to stay electrified. And I've seen bungee cords that are non-electric bungee cords. It's just simply a piece of rope. That's not going to keep animals out or in. So I have not bought any bungee cord rope gates. I have never actually seen one, even though I heard people talk about them, that the bungee cord is electrified. I don't know how it's possible with the wire. So if you have those, let me know. I want to hear about if your bungee cord gates work well. The other gate that would work the exact same way as my rope gates that I don't have here is the poly tape. So poly tape is a flatter, electrified. It does not stretch, maybe a ½ inch over 16 feet. It usually comes in 1 inch up to 4 inch wide flat tape. So think of like a caution tape, but it's electrified. It's usually white. A lot of horse farmers like poly tape because it's more visible. I do not use poly tape because I logically thought through it and thought it's going to get tangled. So that tape is meant to lay flat when you pull it in a gate. As I unhook, hook it on the fence, and go back to hook it, I can see myself getting that thing twisted and having to sit there and untwist it to hook it back until that tape was flat. I didn't want to spend that time. I thought it would be annoying. So I stayed with the round rope versus the flat tape. Could you make a gate out of high tensile wire or barbed wire? As I've done farm consults, and I've had people here to the farm, they've asked me that question. Well, you got extra high tensile wire. Why can't you just use hard wire? Joel Salatin uses hard wire for pigs, and that's their question. You could. Would it theoretically work? Yes. My recommendation is no, never, do not do it. And here's why. We're standing here, high tensile fence. Can you see it? That's my problem with it. High tensile wire, one, it doesn't stretch any, so it's gonna be very hard, and it's gonna be tied into a post and tied into a handle, and you can't see it or barbed wire until you get close. So think about your kid having a friend over riding a four-wheeler, and this is a scenario I did in my head logically, and he's going 30 miles an hour, and that barbed wire or that high tensile wire is there across that gate, and he doesn't see it, and he runs through there, and it really will hurt you. And so that's why logically I've stayed away from it, and I've never tried it. It's not worth the risk to me. If you want to do it, I'm not going to argue with you. It will work. You got to be smarter than that. You can hang red or white tape from it. You can take some poly braid wire and hang strands from it. Yes, you could do something to make it visible. But for me, it's just not worth it. The rope is so cheap. I'm going that route. The other question I've had over time is, what about pig or goat netting? Could you turn that into a gate? Theoretically, yeah, I think you could, but I've talked to people about this and why would you do it? And they told me that, well, we had some pig and goat netting and it got destroyed over time. And so there's sections of it that are still good, but it's either trash, we throw it away, or we try to use it in pieces for other stuff. Okay, yeah, if that's the case, I definitely wouldn't buy netting and make it into a gate. But here's my problem with netting is it's a pain in the butt. It tangles really easy, and it also grounds out really easy. So if I was gonna make a gate out of pig or goat netting, I would cut it lengthwise down a little bit and make it maybe 30 inches tall, and I would stretch it with those spring gates, and I would somehow have to tie it to the other post where it didn't never touch the post because the post will ground it out. And I'm gonna keep that at least 6 inches or a foot off the ground at all times. So when I hook it back up, it's a netting across there, but it's not gonna touch the ground. And so I wouldn't do it. I definitely wouldn't buy it and do it. But if you had scrap, that's what you had, use what you got, be inventive with it. And I'm gonna show you something that I was inventive with out here. You've already saw a piece of it, but the other style of gate that I have. So behind me here, we have my homemade gates. And so these gates are 4 foot tall and 24 foot long. So what this is, if you can't tell, this is shelving from an industrial setting. So these were industrial shelves. They're the side pieces to them. So they were 24 foot tall. They were all bent up, banged up from times. They used them for years and years in a warehouse, and they got bent up so bad that they were unsafe. They were throwing them away. So I brought these home and I welded pig wire. Now, sorry, they're in the fence line. I don't use them very often. I welded pig wire all to these industrial shelf racking. And then on this end down here, I did that same kind of concept as my brackets for my corral gates, and I welded it to this end. So one end has 2 singles, and then the other end has 2 doubles, and then they link together, and I put pins in them. And we use these for our pigerator up here. What I've done is just had those brackets, went ahead and put them on this post here, This is the shed where we feed hay and where the cows are in the winter if they need to be out of the weather. I have another set of those over there on that post right there. And the cows are in here for the winter. We bed them down. We use deep bedding. It gets about 6 inches to a foot because we don't ever shut gates. They can always go out to a pasture that's a grass-fed standard. We don't lock our cows in the barn. Now, I'm not opposed to that, and I know that Joel Salatin locks them in at times and feeds hay that way, and other people do. I'm not saying you don't have to, but on videos here, when we market our grass-fed beef, we say grass-fed. We use that term. In that term, it says that I'm never supposed to lock them in a barn. And so as long as they always have access to pasture, which we have all these different pastures around our barns, and so the cows can go out of this at all times. So we don't get as much manure buildup as somebody who would lock them in a barn. I've seen these guys that do the Joel Salatin method and lock them into deep bedding, and they'll have 2 foot deep or 3 foot deep of stuff just continually piled. We don't get that here, but we do get, I think the most I've had is about a foot. We'll take those gates that I made, put them across here, and now this becomes our pigerator. It easily locks those pigs into the shed, and we'll even take all the manure that would be laying out here. So hopefully I'll get some wood chips delivered. If you're local and you have a tree company, please, I want wood chips. I'll take as many as you can bring, but we cover this whole area out here with wood chips. I'll scoop them off in the spring and I'll dump them up in that barn and then put the pigs in on top of them. Well, there you have it. That is the different gates that we use here on the farm. This kind of got to be a lengthy video as I showed you all those. I didn't intend for it to be that long, but thanks for sticking around. I hope that helped you in ways that you can be inventive to save money on gates. And so, like I said, I'm at the point now, my comfortability without having an actual gate, I can use rope and other things because my cows are trained. They're trained to that single strand. The other thing you're going to need if you're going to do this is a hot charger. And so we recommend the SpeedRite or the StayFix brand. I have a SpeedRite i6000 with a remote. That's a nice charger. You want to use something that's hot though. Don't use a TSC brand. Nothing against that company. They're just not as hot. And so I use a very hot, high joule amount charger, which makes those gates very effective. My cows respect the fence at all times. And so if you're going to say that, hey, these won't work, or you don't think these will work, that's a key point that makes them work, is that they're very hot. And so it's a good way to save a lot of money. Gates can be very expensive. They are going to rust away over time, so they are going to have to be replaced. I've seen gates last 20 years if they were taken care of, if they're not in the grass or in the mud or in the dirt. As long as you can keep them dry, they don't sag down and get all dirty. They don't get crunched by a tractor or a cow, or that's mainly the way I've seen gates broke, is somebody running into them. But there's some different methods for you to hopefully save you some money on your farm. Hope this video helps. Please like and subscribe. If it does, it really does help our channel. Thanks for sticking with us. Let me know if there's something else that we do that you want to see. I do have a lot of other videos planned. It's just trying to find time before it gets dark at night to get these done and still running our farm here. So if that's it, have a good night. Thanks for watching.